I can only speak to the time since I've given my life over to Christ, and people know where I stand. I know where they stand, and everyone's been respectful. Maybe it's just the crews I've worked with that I've never had any issues with it. I mean, yeah, we definitely disagree on things, but if you get a good crew, we're there to tell that story.
This is the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast, helping filmmakers who share a Christian worldview stay in touch, informed, and inspired. Quiet on set. Rolling. Today's host is Matt Chastain.
Yes, indeed. So as you have heard, this is the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast. Excited to have you guys joining us today. We've got a guest that I'm actually really excited to talk to because this is a guest who, if you go to his IMDb page, this dude's working. This dude is working. So Chris Kieffer, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you to take a little time out.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So Chris, I'm going to kind of go over your bio for a second just so that the listeners can get to know who you are and what you do. Chris, like all of us, wears a lot of hats in the film industry: writer, producer, creative director, creating faith-based content, story-driven content that really shares biblical truth through the powerful storytelling that we all aspire to tell. Chris is also a father of 4. You may hear some of his kids in the background. Like I told him, I don't mind that at all because that's the way our house sounds when we have several kids.
Exactly.
That's great. But Chris, you bring 20 years of film and TV experience, including 12 at Warner Brothers. I looked at your IMDb page, and it is, go look up Chris on IMDb. I encourage you to do that because he's led creative teams on projects such as The Mandalorian, Grogu, Westworld, Interstellar, Star Trek, Picard, Fallout, Godzilla. Most recently, I see you worked in the Naked Gun movie, which I'm excited to see that. That's a reboot that I'm not sure they could have done with anybody else besides him. So, Chris, you're a guy who makes stuff. So I just want to kind of dive in and talk about kind of how you got where you got. The most common role I see in your IMDb is video graphics supervisor. So let's just start there, and then let's go back to the beginning and let's talk about your journey on how you got here.
So that's a job that nobody understands what it is, of course, right? So
here's your chance to correct the record.
Yeah, right. So what we do for that particular role as video graphics supervisor, it falls under the term video playback graphics. And in films and TV shows, that can encompass a lot. What we do is we create content for anything as minor as a phone. Like when you see a phone call, even sometimes those are built because you can't show the date, the time, or the carrier, things like that. So anything from a phone all the way to like a police bullpen, with 50 screens, or a command center, a military base, or sci-fi things like a spaceship. You got a cockpit, or you got holograms, or anything that you see that is like tech interfaces, screens, holograms, all of those types of things that we create. And sometimes those are done in production or post-production. And so that's why they call it video playback graphics, because we actually try and play it back on set. So an actor can interact with it if possible, or we do it later in post.
Yeah, doing that practically when you can really, really helps our editors and our post-graphics folks. I remember doing a movie once, and we had a ton of shots the next day where the actor is going to be looking at a cell phone. He can't get his call out, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have any of that ready, and I don't want to just make it green and tell the post-production. That's 4 days of post right there, having to, track all that in After Effects and that kind of thing. So when you can do it practically, it sure helps.
Yeah, especially, depending on the sets. Like we just did a set where we had like 200 plus screens.
Good grief.
Different variations and sizes. And we had I think it was like 190 foot LED wall, right? Like that's where all the action's happening. It's like big command center. And post would kill us if we just made that whole room blue, So a lot of the times what you might do is just fill that set, all the screens on the floor, even on the wall, and then shoot as much as you can in camera, especially when, you're tied on an actor and it's blurred in the background, or you get texture in the background, right? It doesn't have to be 100% the content that you need. You may not have some of the content, right? Depending on what you're shooting. So at least filling a lot of those holes for visual effects, they're very happy when we can do that.
Well, there's a different look too. You can't just green screen. It goes flat sometimes. Even if you're trying to achieve a bokeh, okay, you put a blur behind them, but that's not the same as true in-camera bokeh with real graphics behind them. It's just not the same at all.
Yeah, sometimes we cheat that too, where we might actually shoot it gray or black, depending on what the VFX supervisor wants, or the on-set one. And they'll shoot it practical as well, so that they have reference to try to get as close to the real thing as possible. You got lens distortion, all that kind of stuff. And if it doesn't match, it looks wrong. It looks placed.
Well, and doing what you do, that also means you have to have a good grasp of everybody on set. You got to know how camera works. You got to know how the
Yes.
lighting and grip works. You really have to have a mastery, some sort, of all the elements of all the jobs on set.
Yeah, we interface with a lot of them actually. So a lot of times we'll be working with art department, set deck, even lighting, the cinematographer, the DP and everyone, because like we have to color correct the monitors. Are we shooting 3200? Or like what
Right.
are we shooting? So we've got to balance the monitors for all of those things as well. And can we balance the monitors? And then set deck, like it just worked on the Mandalorian Grogu. I mean, we obviously have, Star Wars, right? So we got spaceships, we've got all kinds of things and all of those weird bezels and cutouts. And so we have to build things that fit, within those. And then how are they actually going to put that? Is it a monitor? Is it an iPad? Like, how are we actually building it into the set? And then can we wire it? And so we work with electrical. And so we end up touching a lot of the departments on a set.
I could go in for days and talk more and more and more, but I want to kind of go back to the beginning and learn more about kind of how you got into all this. How did you get into the film industry? And let's talk about your faith journey and all that. So let's start from the beginning, sir.
Okay. Before I got into the film industry, I was working doing graphic design and doing print and stuff like that. And but I've always wanted to do motion graphics and I've always wanted to do film. But I was moving over into motion graphics and animation and things like that while I was working in print and that kind of stuff. And I had just been working on a demo as much as I possibly could, and submitting it to all the places and, never hearing anything back like most people. You just send it to a void and hope for at least get a response like, yeah, we got it, but nothing, And then sure enough, one time it was a friend of a friend who works in this department, heard that they needed somebody. And he's like, hey, I play in a band with this guy and I think his son does graphics and, one of those kind of things. Right. And I went in for an interview at Warner Brothers and it was a kind of triage mode. Like one of their main guys got sick and they were just looking to fill that spot as fast as possible. So I went and I helped them out on this project. And then it was definitely a grind, a weekend grind, like 24 straight hours a day, just trying to get this done over a weekend. It was for something that shot the following, week. And that was my entry into trying out the film industry. And that was that. It just ended right after that. It was like a weekend's worth of work. And then I didn't hear back for like 6 months. I was like, oh, well, maybe I didn't do very good or something. I had no idea. But then, the movie is coming out and I'm like, oh, cool. Like I'll get a credit, all that kind of stuff, and then I go to the movies to watch it. And of course my scene's cut from the whole movie. The one thing I did and, no credits, nothing like that. And I was like, oh, I see how this works now. You know what I mean? It was interesting. I learned a lot doing that. And it was funny though. And then I was like, all right, well, I'll keep looking, and see what I could find. And then I can't remember how much later it was. It was a while later though. Then it called me back and they were like, hey, we're doing a project and we want to see if you want to come in and help. And at the time I was running an art department for a print company. And then I went down and talked to them again. And it was one of those things where they bring me in and they're like, hey, we really need help with the programming side of this. And I know you anime, like programming and stuff like that. And what sucks is I didn't know any of that. I don't know why they thought I knew that. And so I go down there thinking that like it was all about just graphics strictly, but it was about programming all the graphics. And for some reason they thought I did that. And I was like bummed out because I'm like, oh, now, they're just going to be like, never mind, And I was like, well, I mean, I could do graphics though, and they're like, yeah, we're a little behind or we'll put you in a room and we'll see what you can do, And I was like, oh, awesome. So at least they gave me a chance and they said, we're only going to guarantee you a week's worth of work. That's it. And so I went back to my job and I was like, hey, I'm going to take a week off, and they were like, okay, that's fine. And then, but at the time I was, looking for other jobs and I got a call from a company I interviewed at and they were like, hey, you got the job if you want it. And I was like, awesome, give me a week, like, and they were like, no, we need you to start right away. And I was like, nah, yeah, I need a week. And then I was like, I at least need a week to tell a 2-week notice to at least tell my company, that I'm leaving. And they were like, no, and this job was almost double what I was making at the other company. And they were like, if you don't take this now, we're going to move on. And I was like, well, I just need a week, and they're really pushing and I didn't know what to do. And this is before I turned my life over to Christ. So I was praying and thinking right in my head, and they literally just said, all right, we'll give you a $5,000 sign-on bonus and you start tomorrow. And I'm
I
like,
quit.
Well, no, I was like, okay, so do I take the 5K bonus and just take this job as making more than I'm making, or just one guaranteed week at Warner Brothers, And of course I, did what I probably most people wouldn't do. I was like, yeah, I'll take the WB thing. And so I was like, I'm going to go do this for a week. And if you're not willing to work with me, then I'm going to pass. And they were like, fine, then you're out. I was like, all right, what's WB? And then they put me in a room and they're like, all right, go. They kind of just go, left me in a room and I was there for like 12 hours just going, and came back at the end of the day and he's like, what do you got? And I was like, this is what I have. And he's like, most of my good designers will get out, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 screens a day, full completed pieces. And he's like, how many you got? I was like, I got like 20 or 30. And he's like, no, you don't. And then I was like, yeah, I don't know if they're good enough, and he looked at it and he's like, all right, you're not going anywhere. And so my contract with WB was for 1 week and it stayed that way for 12, 13 years.
Wow. Well, you had mentioned something earlier about, you said you knew graphics, but they said you needed to program graphics.
Correct.
What's the difference in programming graphics and designing graphics?
Yeah. So there's a process of like designing, animating, and then programming. And the programming comes into play where that's how we're going to actually interact with it on the set. And so sometimes, depending on the device, whether it's a phone or a laptop or a computer, or sometimes back then they would use tape, they would record the graphics to a 3/4 machine tape or something, and they were just queuing tapes or DVDs. And there's so many different ways you can do it. But the programming side of it, a lot of it back then was Adobe Director. There was Director, Flash. There's a bunch of other programs, but the big ones back then when I first started were it was Director and Flash.
Adobe Director. I'm not sure that's even still in the Creative Suite.
No, that's all gone. Yeah.
Or even what it does. One of those things you had to learn on the fly. Sure, I can do that. Let's see.
Yeah, that's kind of how it went. But I definitely lean more into the design side. They had a really good programmer there. I was like, I'll let him do that. I'll just, I'm good.
Make the good designs.
Yeah, I was better in there. I'm not a good programmer for sure.
Well, you mentioned that was kind of before you had given your life to Christ.
Yes.
So you're already in the industry. You're a grown man. Sounds like you probably have a kid or two, at least at that point in time. How did the faith journey intersect with your professional journey?
Let's see. I was actually, I think we were just getting close to my wife and I having our first kid as this journey took off, working in this industry. And it was easy at first, especially having like one kid that's, newborn, like they can pack them up, let's go. Like, I think my first big film I had where I was on set, they said, you're going to New York. I was like, not without my family, and they're like, all right. So my wife and our 3-month-old son packed up and went to Manhattan for like 3 months, it was a cool experience, and at first it's, you're in this industry and it's like kind of that, a little bit of that glamour. It's kind of like, cool, I'm on a set, I'm working on these projects, and I was grateful to be doing all those things. And then I started grinding just nonstop and, thinking that I'm doing the right thing and working 40, to 80 hours a week sometimes. Like because I live near LA, near Burbank, but about an hour away from it. And so like every day I would drive about an hour and a half to Burbank and then an hour and a half back home if there's no traffic. And you live in LA, there's always traffic. So minimum 3 hours a day driving plus, working all night and every day. So that started to kind of work its way into, my family and stuff. And that's going to cause problems over time, and my wife and I had more children and been going on for a long time and working way too much. And, it gets to a point where you can't really, you run out of gas at some point, right? Working that much. And yeah, I mean, I've always had this, I always felt like there was more, but I just hadn't found it. And my wife's father, he ended up, I feel like planting that seed, where me and him would get into, I wouldn't say arguments, but conversations, get deep into conversations. I had lots of questions and we would always go back and forth in it. And I think that kind of, that seed had sprouted at a point with him, and then he had passed away untimely. And so that kind of pulled me back out of it, right? At that point, it was like back to the grind and just start going again, right? Because like it started, but it would, I didn't know what to do with it at that point. We had nowhere to go with it really. And then my wife, we couldn't really find any churches, anything in our area. And we were both going through a lot of things. And on a whim, she just was driving and just stopped at this church randomly. And she's just like, I say randomly, right? But she had felt the urge to stop at this church and went in and start talking to these people. And then I went to go talk to them. And I mean, it was just never stopped from there. And then after that, this was I'm skipping a lot, sorry, my late 30s, so I'm already in my late 30s. We have 4 children already. We've been living a life and going. And just going with what I thought was the normal thing, like I'm working really hard and providing for my family, doing these things and thinking that that's working. And, and then once I let that seed flourish in this church, and it's just been nonstop since. Everyone's just like, I've talked to my pastor. He's like, oh, some days say like that's the honeymoon phase, right? It's going to run out. And I'm like, it still hadn't happened, like it's just going, nonstop. Yeah, I don't know if that answered that question.
Take your media mountain with Content Christian Media Conference. Join hundreds of filmmakers, actors, screenwriters, podcasters, and authors on September 22nd to 26th at the 40-acre Christian Film Studio, Capernaum Studios in Poolville, Texas. New this year, hands-on training in acting, writing, cinematography, editing, AI, VFX, and more. Grow in your craft with over 45 workshops. Also new this year, a full-day networking event specifically designed to help you make meaningful connections, grow your community, and build your team. Christian Media Conference has a 5-star rating. Go to christianmediaconference.com and discover the long list of world-class speakers, workshops, boot camps, and more. That's christianmediaconference.com.
That's beautiful. Because I hear this theme over and over again, and I'm wondering, is it as true as the rumors have it? That, I mean, you're working in an almost antithetical biblical worldview, or by a worldview that's almost antithetical to biblical worldview. Have you come into that conflict in the industry at all?
Well,
or is that just my own kind of? I'm from the Southeast, so obviously we have a different view of California, but maybe it's not a fair view.
Well, I think I can only speak to the time since I've given my life over to Christ. And, before that industry, I wasn't really thinking about that, right? So it didn't come up in any way. But since then, there is projects I'll turn down, and some people don't like that I'll turn down a project, like whether it's that person who came to me with the project or whatever. And some of them are totally fine with that. Being where I'm at in Hollywood-ish area, there's definitely a lot less. Like, there's very few film and television things out here that are Christian-based or faith-based. You get like Kappa Studio and stuff like that, and they're awesome. And so I'm meeting some of those people and just trying to network into it. But like, I've never had anyone, I've been on sets and things like that. People know where I stand, I know where they stand, and everyone's been respectful. Maybe it's just the crews I've worked with that I've never had any issues with it like that. I mean, yeah, we definitely disagree on things, but if you get a good crew, we're there to tell that story.
I found that to be definitely the case. There is something beautiful about set culture. It is it relies on mutual respect and as few people as possible bringing egos to the table.
For sure.
That I have noticed, that when it goes well, when it's run by the right producer and the right director, that you can have a set culture where people come from different points of view and all still respect each other.
100%. Yeah. And that's when you see it when you're there on set. I've been on films that are the exact opposite. I mean, it is just, you're there for a check and that's all anyone cares about. And there's no love or passion in that project. And it sucks. And, sometimes you just gotta finish the project. But then when you're on the opposite side of it, and it's so polarizingly different.
Most definitely. I mean, I've been on sets that are for a Christian movie in which most of the crew are not Christians. But when that set culture is right, even they know they are there to help tell a biblical story, and most of them are fine with it because, again, it's about dropping ego and all working together toward a common goal.
Yeah, the welcome that we've had, like my wife and I work together a lot on projects, and so the welcome we've had, like we went to our first film festival, Christian Film Festival, about a month ago, if that, and the welcoming, it's overwhelming, and it's a completely different culture. It's the same culture because we all want to make films and tell stories, but you could definitely feel that shift, right? Like when I walked into those festivals and things like that, like one of the differences I've noticed is not all, but a lot of the industry and the way it's set up is you meet everybody because it's like, how am I going to use that person to get what I need out of them? It's all about like, how can I get something out of these people? And walking into those festivals and talking to everyone, it's all about like, how can I help you? Yeah. And it's a completely different dynamic.
It's a much more beautiful dynamic for sure.
Yeah,
Which festival did you make it to?
The Hard Faith Film Festival. That's like the only one in LA. There's like none out here. So my wife and I are looking, and it's like North Carolina and Texas. And so, yeah, I mean, we'll go. We got to plan for that.
Yeah, especially with 4 kids. I get that.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, so have you had a chance to work on some faith-based projects that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, it was awesome, actually. So, I mean, how I got to this podcast, for Faith and Family, that was the thing. One, as I started this journey, I just, and praying, like open the doors. Like, if this is what you want me to do, please help guide me, because I don't know anybody in Hollywood that wants to do these types of projects. And so I'd love to meet people. And the Faith and Family is one of the first places I'd found. I started going to their meetups. And, we're just networking, they got like network meetups. It's been great, and definitely opening up some doors. And first few of those that I went to, I ended up jumping on one of the calls randomly. And there's a guy in there named Jared. I think he does a show, Vindication.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd never heard of it. I was like, never heard of it. I didn't know who he was. And I was just in there meeting people and networking. And I just explained what I do. And he was like, we got to talk after this. I was like, okay, sure. Like, I don't know who you are. We'll chat. And we ended up jumping on a call and chatting afterward. And he told me what he was doing, and he's working on a project, and that project has a ton of this stuff in it. And he's like, I didn't know what to do. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. He's like, you jumped on that call, and it was like, God lined you up. Like, here you go. You're looking, how are you going to do this? And so we ended up talking and got into it. And my wife and I jumped on the project and helped him out for his special episode he's going to do for Vindication and stuff. And it went really well.
That's awesome. Yeah, you'd be surprised how much Jared's name comes up on this podcast. He's a popular guy. I will say that if you're ever in Dallas, Texas, give him a call, because he'll take you to some of the best barbecue you can find in Dallas, Texas.
I would definitely do that. Yes, he's already offered.
Yeah.
If we're in Texas, there's going to be barbecue.
Yeah, he and I ate our body weights in whatever it was about 3 different meats. I loved it. He's a great guy. And that's exactly what this is all about. What Faith and Family Filmmakers Network really is all about, is just having filmmakers who otherwise wouldn't have a chance to get to know each other, to be able to network and work together. So when you see that happening, not just in theory, it actually happens. So not to be too big a commercial for Jacqueline and Jeffrey, but I think that anybody listening, like, come to those meetups. They will be very fruitful if you bring that attitude of, not what can these people do for me, but hey, how can I help?
Well, I mean, that's how it started. So, I mean, like, even you mentioning it, it helped me, because how I found Faith and Family was, I was just, podcast. What are some Christian filmmaking podcasts? I just started looking for them. That one popped up. I opened it up just on a whim, like, sure. And I started listening to them. And then I was like, what is their website about? Looked into them, and it's come full circle now. Found the podcast, and now I'm on it, I guess. So.
Now you're on it. Yep.
Yeah, right.
Well, you know what? I want to bring you back for another episode, because I've not dived nearly as deep as I want to dive into your story, and kind of what I like to do is really get into the details of what it is that you do in order for you to kind of share your wisdom and offer some advice for other filmmakers. So if you would,
sure,
like, come back for another episode, and let's dive deeper into it.
I'd love to.
Chris Kieffer, filmmaker, graphics guy. He's part of some of the most fun movies. He's got a better IMDb resume than most of us. So go check him out, and we will see you next time on the Faith and Family Filmmaker Podcast.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for listening to the Faith and Family Filmmakers Podcast. If you've been enjoying this podcast, take a moment to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so you don't miss an episode. And if you'd like to support the production of this podcast, you can leave a tip at faffpodcast.com/support. Bringing filmmakers together for faith and family.